Now called to order. We want to welcome all of our witnesses and tell you how excited we are to hear your testimony today. I want to thank you for your service to our country and particularly for taking time to share your experiences and insight with us as we look at the readiness needs for our men and women in uniform. I'm going to do something a little bit out of order today. This is one of the most bipartisan subcommittees I think that we have in Congress, and I am proud to serve with my ranking member from Guam, Madeline Bordello, and she is not only a partner in this, but she is a great resource for us in the entire Pacific area, having traveled there so much, lived there, studied there. And we all believe that the Pacific is a huge area of concern for us in readiness concerns. So I'm going to turn now to Madeline and ask her to offer her opening remarks and any comments that she might have. Ms. Bordello.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your kind remarks. And I do look forward to seeing how this new dialogue format works out during this morning's hearings. To our witnesses, I look forward to your testimony. General Carlisle, it's good to see you again. We miss you out at the 13th Air Force in Hawaii, but we're glad to have your background and expertise in the Pentagon. To the other witnesses, it was nice to meet you all this past week and discuss issues of mutual concern. Today's hearing is the second part in a series that is investigating the readiness of our military to respond in the context of the fiscal year 2012 budget submission to the full spectrum of threats that are known and threats that are unknown. During the last hearing with a panel of outside witnesses, I stressed that assuming risk is expected in any budget, especially in our operation and maintenance budgets. And I think the key is to understand better where we assume risk and why this committee should accept that risk. The QDR, Global Posture Review, and other strategic documents outline a broad and ambitious goal of addressing the full spectrum of threats. And I hope that our witnesses today can contextualize their remarks with these strategic documents as guides. In other words, explain the risk this budget request presents in the context of our nation's strategic global defense posture. And further, I remain concerned that given the size and the scope of the operation and maintenance budget, these accounts are prime targets for budget cuts. Given the current era of fiscal austerity, I fear that these accounts will become even easier targets for cuts as the Department pursues a broad range of cost-cutting initiatives. It may be easy to cut O&M funding now to make up shortfalls elsewhere, but the second and the third order effects of these cuts can end up costing the Department and our taxpayers more in the long run. I also hope that our witnesses will address what impact a potential year-long continuing resolution will have, not just on fiscal year 2011, but on the budget for 2012. I fear that if we do not pass a defense appropriations bill with the requested fiscal year 2011 funding levels, that we will end up with even further significant shortfalls in 2012 that will negatively affect readiness without truly addressing our country's core fiscal issues. In particular, I am concerned about the operational impact of the canceled Navy ship maintenance availabilities. The key to a 313-ship Navy is ensuring that our ships are continually and well maintained to achieve their expected and even extended service life. How will the Navy address this matter? Further, and in a broader context, I am deeply concerned about our training capabilities and overall readiness in the Pacific, AOR. I remain concerned that even while our services move to expanded ISR platforms, we still do not have sufficient coverage in the Pacific. While I greatly appreciate the administration's tremendous focus on the Asia-Pacific region, I believe that more can be done to better posture us against current and emerging threats in this region. We focus on China's growing military power and North Korea's nuclear capability, but we cannot lose sight of asymmetric threats in Indonesia, southern Philippines, and southern Thailand. So I hope our witnesses can also discuss the importance of the military buildup on Guam and the strategic importance of this realignment of military forces to meet both traditional and asymmetric threats in the Asia-Pacific region. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. And once again, I want to welcome all of our members today to what I think is going to prove to be one of our most important hearings of the year. We have the opportunity to discuss not only the state of military readiness today, but to also look to the future readiness needs of the force. Joining us today are four exceptional witnesses representing each of our military services. They are Lieutenant General Daniel P. Bolger, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, U.S. Army; Lieutenant General Hawk Carlisle, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Plans and Requirements, U.S. Air Force; Vice Admiral Bruce W. Klingon, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Operations, Plans and Strategy for the United States Navy; and Lieutenant General Richard T. Tryon, Deputy Commandant for Plans, Policies, and Operations, U.S. Marine Corps. These four distinguished gentlemen are often referred to as the Ops Deputies or Ops Deps inside the Pentagon. They are charged with not only formulating policy to advance their service's core missions, but they are also responsible for determining the operational requirements, capabilities, and training necessary to support the national security objectives and military strategy. Gentlemen, we're truly honored to have you join us today, and we're extremely grateful for all you do to keep this nation safe. Thank you for your service. This hearing is the second in a series of hearings we're holding to us the question, are we ready? Last week's testimony by our panel of independent witnesses was extremely thought-provoking, and I believe it serves as a great framework for our discussion today. The witnesses all emphasized that our force levels are inappropriately sized and apportioned to respond to challenges of current global environment. Ms. Eglin also illuminated the fact that our nation's armed forces are approaching a geriatric state. To give our members a few specific examples of what that really means, our surface fleet has an average age of 19 years. The average age of our strategic bombers is 34 years. The average age of the C-130H fleet, which I know many members are familiar with because we often fly on them when we go on Cadels, is 23 years. Our Air Force tanker fleet is over 46 years. And the Marine Corps amphibious assault vehicle fleet has an average age of 38 years. Not only have we allowed our ships and aircraft to reach this geriatric state, but we've also downsized our inventory. In 1990, we had the equivalent of 76 Army brigades. Today, that number is 45. In 1990, we had 546 Navy ships. Today, we have 286. In 1990, we had 82 Air Force fighter squadrons. Today, we have the equivalent of 39. In 1990, we had 360 strategic bombers. Today, we have 162, and the Air Force wants to retire 6 of these before the next one is even funded. We find ourselves postured in this manner at a time when China has rapidly grown and modernized its military. I ask unanimous consent that this chart depicting the growth in China's surface fleet, submarine force, Air Force, and air defense between 2000 and 2009 be entered into the record. The chart is up on the screen, and each of our members will be given a copy of it. We cannot afford to allow a budget target to be the sole governing basis in our decisions today, or will bear an enormous cost in the future. I like to refer to this as the instant pudding mindset. We have grown accustomed to quick solutions and fast results. However, the outcomes in many cases have been devastating. There will be no instant pudding solutions to these challenges we face. We must break our dependence on deficit spending, write our entitlement programs, unleash our labor force, and reorder our federal government if we are going to successfully respond to China's economic momentum and military buildup. Once again, I'm very thankful to our distinguished witnesses, and I look forward to our discussion. And as a logistical matter, as the ranking member and I discussed prior to the hearing, I would like to dispense with the 5-minute rule for this hearing and depart from regular order so that members may ask questions during the course of the discussion. I think this will provide a roundtable-type forum and will enhance the dialogue on these very important issues. We'd like to proceed with standard order for members to address the witnesses. However, if any member has a question pertinent to the matter being discussed at the time, please seek acknowledgment and wait to be recognized by the chair. We plan to keep questioning to the standard 5 minutes. However, I don't want to curtail productive dialogue. I believe we can do this and still ensure each member has the opportunity to get his or her questions answered. If we get bogged down, the Chair will ask members to hold further discussion until the first round of questioning is complete. I ask unanimous consent that for the purposes of this hearing, we dispense with the 5-minute rule and proceed as described. Since there's no objection, we'll do that. Let me do now two things logistically to our members. One of the things we're trying to do is just get answers. As I mentioned at the outset, we're blessed. This is one of the most bipartisan committees probably in Congress. And we had some suggestions at the last hearing that rather than wait until your 5-minute time comes along, if a member has a question on a follow-up, we want you to ask that question when it comes along. So what we're going to do is go in the order that the members are in terms of seniority. But if you have a question at any time based on that question or anything else, please just let me know, and we're going to try to be as flexible as we can in trying to get those answers. And if it runs too long, I'll just try to stop that, and we'll go into a second round. Gentlemen, as I mentioned at the beginning, we thank you so much for your service, and I want to just kind of frame the opening of this as something different than what we normally do. We have your written testimony, and I've read it, many of our members have read it. If not, they will read it. This morning, what I'm going to ask you to do is something different. Normally, we'll have witnesses that come in. They give us written testimony, and then they give us 5 minutes of prepared remarks. The hope sometime for our witnesses, I think, is to get out without having had to say anything. We're caught in this dilemma. Some of us are frustrated because Congress has been spending way too much money for years in the past, and we know that exists. There is some frustration on some of our members because we don't feel, with some of the folks in the Pentagon, not talking about you, but just some of the folks, we don't always get the answers we need on the analysis that we need. Sometimes people walk over here and they tell us, DOD has decided to make cuts, but you don't need to have any analysis on that at all. You just need to trust us. But then when we make cuts, they come over and say, that's going to be the sky's falling, and you just need to trust us. Oftentimes, you've all heard this. In the field, you've heard the men and women that serve under you say, those guys in Washington just don't get it. This is your one opportunity to help us get it. And so for each of you, I'd like for you to take about 5 minutes each before we go into the question and tell us your perception of what those men and women under your commands need to be ready. Are these budgets going to do it? What are your concerns about our readiness? This is your opportunity to make sure when a fight comes, we've done everything in our power to make sure we have prepared them. And if we thank you for doing that. And in alphabetical order, we're going to start General Bolger with you, if you would, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, Chairman Forbes and Ranking Member Brodillo and all the distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee Readiness Subcommittee. On behalf of Secretary McHugh and General Casey and more than 1 million soldiers who are serving today in the active Army, National Guard, and Army Reserve, thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about just what you just asked about, and that's the state of our Army readiness. And thanks also for all of the members and your continued support and commitment to our soldiers and our operations worldwide. You know, we live in a dangerous world, and I know that's not news to anybody here, but it bears repeating under these circumstances. We're a people that has global political, economic, and security interests, and we do face threats that include terrorists, aggressive states and movements, and even nuclear-armed countries that have powerful conventional armed forces. And one thing we've learned, I think it's been underscored for us in the last few weeks, we can rarely predict the next crisis. When things go wrong, we do have to be ready to fight. We do like to get ahead of the threats when we can to deter and shape them in a constructive way. And we're always ready to engage positively to help our friends and partners. You know, right now, today, soldiers are working in more than 100 countries to train local forces and keep the peace and assist in humanitarian challenges. And soldiers bring a big range of skills. Some of those skills are unique, even among the many skills provided by U.S. government agencies. And because a soldier and soldiers can secure themselves when they go into a foreign country, we can often go into the toughest areas and still make a difference. Whether in combat campaigns or in these shaping operations, successful efforts take time. And America's enemies always question our staying power. So to achieve lasting results, our Army must sustain its operations over the long haul. We built on the experience of the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, as well as our allies, and have reshaped our force on a cycle of readiness for Army forces that runs year after year. We go out and we come back as trained, formed, and well-equipped units, and our combat effectiveness, I think, has been impressive. We do have a strong Army today, active National Guard and Reserve, and we're fighting 2 major land campaigns as we gather this morning. We're also carrying out other key shaping tasks all around the world. We put about 200,000 soldiers out, with 170,000 in rotational forces and about 30,000 forward deployed in friendly countries. About 50 to 70,000 of these soldiers on a daily basis come from the National Guard and Reserve. Today, most of that combat power, as we know, is in Afghanistan and Iraq, and as we draw down in Iraq, we'll let our forces come back from a surge-level pace to one we can follow for a long time and keep going. We'd like to get to about 1 year out and 2 years back for active forces and about 1 year out and 4 years back for the Guard and Reserve, heading to a sustained rate of 1 to 3 and 1 to 5. And that tempo will let us reset and modernize our combat vehicles and our aircraft and our radios and our weapon and all our equipment. And it will also allow us to educate our leaders and our soldiers and to train our units across the full spectrum of operations, from peacekeeping and wide area security up to and include combined arms maneuver. And most important, a sustainable tempo will reinvigorate the strength of our force, our great volunteer soldiers. When we spin too fast, we have some hard results, and we know those. We've got about 30,000 soldiers in long-term medical care, about 40,000 with post-traumatic stress. We've had challenges with our suicide rate, misdemeanor crimes, spouse and child abuse, all that. There's also been a significant monetary cost in billions of dollars, not just in the Army and the armed forces, but across society. These are tragic long-term effects, and I think we have to think that just as we need to reset our jet bombers and our nuclear-powered aircraft carriers with time out for maintenance, we also have to take time to reset and recalibrate our most important strength of our Army, our soldiers. So that's what our Army is doing today. It's an Army America can be proud of, and we will succeed today and in the future with your continued help. Thank you very much.
General Carlisle.
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Bardalo, distinguished members of the committee, again, thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the readiness of your United States Air Force. Before we start, though, I would like to wish Congressman Giffords a speedy recovery and look forward to her coming back to this committee as soon as possible, and for her to know that all the members of the United States military value her and respect her for everything she does for us, and certainly the men and women serving at Davis-Monthan and the Tucson area look for her speedy recovery. My intent today is to describe the current status, activities, and readiness of the United States Air Force. And I'm proud to be here with my joint partners as we're always together. We spend a lot of time just like this in different forums. Let me begin by saying that the 690,000 men and women in the United States Air Force, active duty, Guard, Reserve, and Department of Defense civilians are ready to execute our mission. We are committed to the readiness and the ongoing operations abroad and at home. Mr. Chairman, as you know, since the events of 9/11, the tempo of our operations has continued to increase, with 2010 serving as a benchmark in just about everything we've done. Close air support has increased, our air refueling and airlift within the AOR has increased, our ISR sorties has continued to double, and we're asking more and more of these young men and women every day. I think, to your point, Mr. Chairman, as all the members of Congress's job is to take care of their constituents, the gentleman sitting at this table, our job is to take care of those men and women in harm's way outside the Beltway, and that is what we're going to do. As a matter of fact, you can talk, for one example would be our rescue forces. The heroic actions of our rescue forces have been heralded by the British, our partners over there, as well as all our U.S. partners. And as a matter of fact, the British combat soldiers can call our Pedro guys. That's the call sign of our rescue forces, the helicopters and the airmen, is the only thing more popular than mail in the AOR, which says a lot about what they do. And they say Pedro will come anywhere, anytime, during any weather, and their helicopters have the holes in them to prove it. At the same time, we're trying to recapitalize that fleet and the CSAR fleet and how we get back on step and give them the equipment they need. After 20 years of continuous deployments and 10 years of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, these operations continue to stress both people and platforms, and they challenge our ability to maintain readiness to the full spectrum of operations. And, Mr. Chairman, that's the key. It's the full spectrum of operations. As Congresswoman Bardalo mentioned, there's other things going on in the world, and we're incredibly engaged to win today's fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, but there's things throughout this world we have to be ready for, and that full spectrum operations for all the services is ones that we have to be cognizant of all the time. And again, I know, Mr. Chairman, that everyone in this committee clearly knows it, but given the increase in our operations and a decision to continue to extend the continuing resolution, we all know that will cause major perturbations and problems for our readiness. It'll suspend some system sustainment. Depot maintenance activities will be deferred. Aircraft and airplanes going into depot will be deferred, all of which will adversely affect our people that we're moving into harm's way every day. So we truly hope that Congress can come to a resolution in the DoD budget for FY11 for the benefit of all our military members. Our airmen are dedicated, and they're the foundation of our Air Force. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, it's all about the people and what they do for us day in and day out there. Across the spectrum of what we do, we are meeting and exceeding the combatant commanders' requirements today. All of our capabilities are adequate to meet today's demands. And my concern for the future is how do we prepare for the next conflict in the next generation and what we're going to face next. Our aircraft readiness is adequate. It's not great, and it's not going up. It's leveled to going down. But assume that's not me.
That's not you, General.
It's maintaining a level. It's adequate, but it is troubling for the future, and again, our ability to conduct full spectrum operations. Our mobility forces have doubled their activity almost every year. We're airdropping more in the AOR than we ever have before. I will tell you that with respect to the modernization and the slides you brought up, we have challenges, and we have to face those soon with respect to both modernization and recapitalization of all our fleets. We're on a path with the F-35 and its way forward. The KC-46X, the C-130J, the CV-22s are all good starts, but we got a lot of work to do. And our combat forces continue to provide the needs of our United States and, of course, of our combatant commanders. Mr. Chairman, the Air Force will continue to deliver global vigilance, reach, and power. Resolution, as I said before, the Defense Appropriations Bill will certainly help continue our readiness in the Air Force and our ability to serve this nation's daunting challenges in the future. I have provided a written statement for the record, but I'd like to thank you again for your interest in taking care of your airmen, and on behalf of all the airmen and their families, thank you for what you do for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, General. Apologize for the buzzing, but the Air Force always comes through. So we know. Admiral?
Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Bodeo, and members of the committee, in fact, delighted and privileged to be here today. Today, as we have done for more than 235 years, the Navy is forward deployed around the world, protecting our national interests. Global trends in an uncertain world underpin an increasing demand for sea power. And Mr. Chairman, you asked what might be the preeminent concerns of the sailors, both here and abroad, and I would say that Congress writ large, like this committee, clearly does appreciate that. As a maritime nation, the United States is dependent upon the sea for both economic prosperity and national security, which places global demands on our naval forces. Their expeditionary capabilities enable and support joint force efforts to combat both conventional and irregular challenges in Iraq and Afghanistan, throughout Africa, and elsewhere throughout the world. As has been mentioned, while ground forces remain engaged in overseas contingency operations and eventually reconstitute and reset, naval forces will remain the nation's strategic reserve and immediate response force. The sustained presence and engagement of forward stationed and rotational naval forces will take on even greater importance as the future security environment promises to be characterized by multiple, concurrent, diverse challenges that demand an immediate response that often can't wait for diplomatic access to be negotiated. The President's budget in 12 continues to maintain a Navy that is forward postured and present to prevent conflict, deter aggression, enhance cooperative relationships, build the maritime security capacity of partners, provide humanitarian assistance, and prevail in combat at and from the sea, if required. Thank you for your unwavering commitment to our sailors, our Navy civilians, and their families, and for all you do to make the United States Navy an effective and enduring global force for peace. I look forward to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Admiral. General?
Good morning, Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Bodillo, and distinguished members of the committee here today. Today, after nearly a decade of combat operations, the United States Marine Corps remains the country's expeditionary force in readiness. The ability of the Marine Corps to serve as the nation's crisis response force can be attributed to the steadfast support of this committee and Congress, and for that, sir, we thank you. The Commandant has established 4 service-level priorities as he has entered office. First, to provide the best trained and equipped Marine units to Afghanistan. Second, rebalance our Corps and posture it for the future. Third, to better educate and train our Marines to succeed in what is an increasingly complex operational environment. And fourth, to keep faith with our Marines, our sailors, and their families. At this moment, there are roughly 32,000 Marines deployed around the world. 20,000 are serving in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Partnered with the United States Navy, we are forward deployed and forward engaged across the globe. Deployed and deploying units report the highest levels of readiness for their assigned missions. The distributed nature of the battlefield in Afghanistan, however, requires that we augment our forward deployed forces with additional equipment and personnel from non-deployed forces and strategic programs. We can sustain this commitment under current conditions for as long as the nation requires, acknowledging that it comes at a cost. Our equipment abroad and at home station has been heavily taxed after nearly 10 years of combat operations. 67% of non-deployed units report degraded readiness in the areas of capabilities and/or resources. Resource shortfalls often manifest themselves as capability gaps in individual unit or collective core competencies. The primary factor underlying this is equipment. Approximately 63% of non-deployed forces report that mission-essential equipment shortfalls exist within their units. Home station equipment does not qualify for OCO funding in general. Units in dwell are also heavily leveraged in terms of leadership and occupational expertise. This is necessary in order to sustain ongoing operational commitments of the deployed force. And for this reason, approximately 35% of non-deployed units report key personnel shortfalls. Operations have placed an unprecedented demand on ground weapon systems, vehicles, aviation assets, and support equipment. Congress's continuing support is needed to posture the Marine Corps for the future, and this will require a multi-year effort well beyond the end of operations in Afghanistan and the drawdown thereafter. Our Commandant has directed that post-OEF, we will reconstitute as a middleweight force capable of operating across the spectrum of conflict. And what this means is that we will be capable of operating in the realm of theater security cooperation, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, crisis response, as well as conventional high-intensity combat and amphibious forcible entry. We are currently in the midst of a comprehensive planning effort to fulfill the Commandant's vision. Building upon our strong traditional foundation and incorporating lessons learned from this conflict, we are confident that the future Marine Corps will remain a capabilities-based organization, agile, flexible, and versatile. As Marines continue to serve in combat, the Marine Corps remains the nation's crisis response force, ready to respond to today's crises with today's forces today. The Marine Corps needs to sustain support of the American people and Congress to maintain that readiness. In order to meet the challenges of the future and the future security environment, we will require significant consideration with respect to reset and reconstitution. The Marine Corps is grateful for the support that Congress has provided to date. We are also mindful of the fiscal realities confronting our nation. We are committed to being responsible stewards of the scarce public funds that are available, and we are dedicated to serve the nation with honor, courage, and commitment as America's expeditionary force in readiness. So thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to the discussion and to your questions.
General, thank you, and thank all of our witnesses. At this point in time, going into our questioning, and one of the things that I'm going to do is to defer my questions to the end because I want to hear our members' questions, and I may intersperse some of mine throughout. But I'd like to, at this particular point in time, recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from Guam, for any questions she might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very quick. I have an immediate concern relative to the fiscal year 2011 continuing resolution. And I would like to hear from all of the witnesses in just a very brief answer what impact a continuing resolution would have on operational matters in fiscal year 2011 as well as in fiscal year 2012. We've already seen cancellations of ship availabilities in the Navy, so this situation is deeply concerning to me. So if you could just briefly answer that, beginning with General Bolger.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, for us in the Army, the continuing resolution challenge really comes down to operations and maintenance writ large, and that is we're going to do those things necessary to maintain our forces that are going into the fight. The challenge is we'll begin to defer maintenance and training to give us capability for the full spectrum. So based on a year-long continuing resolution, our effect, we'd lose about $3 billion in our operations and maintenance budget, and we'd have to focus our remaining resources clearly on the next to deploy. That would mean some of the full spectrum training we have scheduled this year to regain our capability, for example, to do airborne assaults with elements of the 82nd Airborne, to do tank-on-tank combat with our armored forces, to do middleweight combat, as Rick Tryon referred to, that the Marines are gearing back. Some of that will be deferred because we're going to put our money towards the next deploy units. There'll be some significant impacts, I believe, on housing and installations because military construction obviously is awaiting this, and so the new starts will not occur. In addition, as I think you're aware, the Department of the Army has just recently extended their 30-day hiring freeze on civil servants another 30 days. So as that continues, that means that some soldiers will probably have to be diverted to do tasks that civil servants might be doing now. Take us back to maybe 15 years ago where soldiers were doing things like checking vehicle registrations and at gates and mowing the lawn and all that kind of stuff, which again diverts from the training and readiness that our force would need. And finally, ma'am, I think the other thing that I would mention is the challenge it will cause in terms of modernization. Because obviously with the continuing resolution, we're going to maintain what we have, but we're not going to procure new weapons, some of which we're in the middle of procurement phase, and some, like our ground combat vehicle, they're just to start some major phases in their development. So all that would be on hold as we go through the continuing resolution. I guess I would summarize by saying it will create a deferred maintenance in this year, and that bill will have to be paid at the same time we're trying to fight a war in Afghanistan and close out combat major operations in Iraq, ma'am.
Thank you, General. General Carlisle.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Very similar. I think probably all four of us will have much the same comments. The O&M budget will be significantly affected. Flying hour programs and depot maintenance and depot level repairables will all be deferred. Today we're cash flowing to maintain the capability to serve the fight, but that's going to run out, and at that point we're going to have to start doing other pretty draconian things to just support the fight, no training back home. So on the O&M budget, as we move money within the O&M budget to cash flow what we're doing now, if it's not fixed in the fairly near term, then it's going to cause some pretty significant problems as we move forward. Also, MILCON is another one, new mission MILCON as well existing mission MILCON. We have projects out there and capabilities that we're going to bring to the fight fairly soon that we can't with no MILCON budget. And also on the procurement side, we're going to ramp up, for example, our MQ-9 purchase to provide more ISR to the fight. We can't increase that by until we get a budget. So we're stuck at a lower capability, and that's, although it's procurement, it's near-term procurement that we can't do. Also new starts. Some of the capabilities that we're putting on those platforms, whether it's an ISR platform in a kinetic or non-kinetic manner, or some system or weapon that is a fairly short procurement or timeline that we can get out in the field that we have to defer, and all this time is causing us. And then the third one, again, as Dan said, is the MILPERS and CIVPERS shortfalls are ones that are going to, the hiring is an issue, as well as the fact that we know we have a MILPERS and a CIVPERS shortfall that we're going to have to figure out where that money is going to come from to pay for that. And again, we're going to have probably folks in uniform doing things that were done by civilians that we can't do. So,
thank you. Thank you, General. Admiral?
Ma'am, the continuing resolution is having an effect both on current readiness and future readiness. Like all the services, we will guarantee that the forces going forward into conflict and to do the forward deployed missions are ready. So as we find ourselves in a situation where we need to reduce both flying hours and steaming days, those shortfalls will be allocated against the forces that we're maintaining in their sustainment phase, which are our surge forces to respond to crises that may emerge, and in those forces that are preparing to deploy. So we'll see a decline in readiness to complete the mission set. Quite specifically, if the continuing resolution were to continue through the balance of the year, we would find ourselves canceling 29 of 85 maintenance availabilities for ships. 70 aircraft requiring depot maintenance wouldn't get it. 290 engines wouldn't get their overhauls. 140 maintenance and construction projects across about 74 bases wouldn't be completed. And then you look to the procurement side, the future readiness side, we'd find ourselves not being able to procure 2 DDG 51s, which are our BMD and multipurpose combatants. Virginia-class submarine wouldn't be procured. 2 reactor cores, one for an SSBN and one for a carrier, wouldn't be procured. Well, thousands of orders for individual sailors wouldn't be processed, so they would miss some of them important career milestones. And lastly, our travel is curtailed as we endeavor to go build relationships with partners and enhance their abilities to carry their own security burdens. That's being reduced as well.
Thank you, Admiral. General?
Yes, ma'am. Many of the same issues raised by my colleagues here apply. Equipment reset and future reconstitution is, of course, the greatest concern that we all have. We also will experience some concerns with SIVPER's funding levels. The continuing resolution affects us in the current year, and it will have a ripple effect in the out years. Immediately, MILCON comes to mind. 567 million in contracts have not been awarded to date. $2.4 billion is at risk for the remainder of the year. Contained in that is 13 BEQs, Bachelor Enlisted Quarters, that are necessary to get our Marines and serving sailors out of Cold War era barracks that are 40 to 50 years old and put them into facilities that are appropriate for them. $71 million has not been awarded for our high mobility artillery rocket system. There's $168 million in the budget, but that significantly hampers our ability to procure and build toward the future, and it also violates some of the economy of scales that we would typically enjoy as we make these purchases. Equipment reset, as discussed, is delayed, and there also we lose our economy of scales in making purchases that we can with the United States Army and the other services. Flight hours projected to shortfall of about $225 million in our flight hour program at the rate that we're currently progressing, and we are flying at normal rates right now. Our sortie-based training plan will be suspended sometime during the fourth quarter of this fiscal year. Marine Air Ground and Control System contracts have not been awarded. Tactical communication modernization contracts to the tune of $61 million have not been awarded, and the list goes on. It's significant today in the here and the now, and it won't get any better because the cost of recovery, I would anticipate, will only increase. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to ask that question. And as you could see, all branches of the military agree on this. I know that Congress is looking for ways to address our financial situation, but a continuing resolution for the Department of Defense will only cost us more money and will certainly be very serious to our security in the future. So I thank all of the witnesses, and if any of the others would like to.
Thank you, Ms. Bordello, and I think all of us concur. We just wish that the last Congress could have gotten their budget out so you guys weren't having this hanging over your head. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So we have to try to look and see how we can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And that's going to mean, as the CR goes through, also looking at your FY12 figures, because we know they're all based on the fact that you had the FY11 figures as well. Our next question will be done by Dr. Hack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of the members here today for your dedication to our men and women in uniform and for your careers of selfless sacrifice to our nation. My question is for General Bolger. I appreciated the line in your written testimony regarding the Reserve Force as being a well-equipped, highly trained, and battle-wise operational force. Reserve Forces is the area that's near and dear to my heart. And my question is regarding the ARFIGEN model and trying to get to the 1 to 2 active duty and 1 to 5 reserve dwell time. In my and I'm speaking as a commander who's got units either deployed, getting ready to deploy, or just coming back from deployment. It seems that the ARFIGEN model, there is a disconnect between TDA forces and TO&E forces. I live on the TO&E side. I'm sorry, on the TDA side. And so as we're cannibalized to backfill units that are otherwise deploying, we wind up falling out of our ARFIGEN cycle. For instance, I have got a unit that's in year TR2 that's currently deployed. What, if any, efforts are underway to try to come up with a force sustainment model that takes in the unique needs of the TDA side of the Reserve House?
Sir, a great question. And the situation you described, my colleague Rick Tryon talked about the same challenge that's occurring in the Marine Corps in particular, but in other services. What we're doing in the Army now, sir, is we have looked at not just our operations force, where we put our first emphasis naturally to get forces in the field to fight. Now we're also looking at the institutional side of the Army, what we call the generating force, the part of the Army that gets the other part ready. We're trying to apply some of the same methods to them to get them onto a cyclical readiness, just as you described, so we don't have to borrow from those units to fill up the next deployers. And I'll tell you, sir, that the two things that are going to help with that, I believe, are one, sort of systematizing our access to the reserve components, because the Guard and the Reserve are integral to what we do. As we gather this morning, there's almost 70,000 Guardsmen and Reservists on duty today with the U.S. Army. We could not carry out our tasks around the world without this unprecedented amount of support from our citizen soldiers. So we got to think of ways to make sure that great veteran force is looked after and fully integrated in everything we do. And along those lines, sir, as you may be aware, Secretary McHugh asked General Reimer, the retired Army Chief of Staff, General Dennis Reimer, he and Lieutenant General Helmley and Lieutenant General Schultz, senior leaders of our Guard and Reserve, came together, ran a panel, and looked at how do we operationalize the Guard and Reserve. And not surprisingly, they brought back the exact kind of cases you just described and said, we have to do the institutional work and the policy work that will solve that. And some of that may require, after we get done looking at it, we may want to come back to the Congress for potential legislative assistance if it's some authorities or something that we need to look at to better integrate our Guard and Reserve in the force, sir. So a long answer, but a really critical subject for our force today, sir.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Heck. And that excellent question. General, could I just follow up with one of the things that Dr. Heck raised? In your testimony, you also mentioned that the Army is institutionalizing or trying to a rotational scheme, and you go on to mention the need to deliver a predictable supply of military power. One of the questions we always ask ourselves is the Army ready based on the current readiness state that we have and how stretched out you are to deal with unpredictable events around the world? Because one thing we know is that we're not good at predicting where they're going to be.
Sir, you're exactly right. As we gather this morning, the Army does have a capability in the Global Response Force that if I would have met you a few years back, I wouldn't have been able to say that. We have an Airborne Brigade combat team in readiness at Fort Bragg if they're needed for anything around the world. Our intent is to expand that surge force or that emergency force so that eventually it will grow to a size of one division headquarters, or I'm sorry, one corps headquarters, 3 division headquarters, 10 brigade combat teams, and about 41,000 enabling forces of troops. We're not there yet, and that's really contingent on our drawdown in Iraq proceeding on schedule and no increase in our commitments worldwide. But if those things go into effect, we believe in our planning that soldiers who deploy after the 1st of October in the active component can expect a year out and then 2 years back, and in the reserve component can expect a year out mobilized and then 4 years back, and that will allow us to reconstitute that surge force or that emergency force for just the kind of contingencies you're describing, sir. We're not there yet, but we can see it. And the only warning I would say is it's always dependent on world conditions, sir.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Gibson from New York had a quick follow-up question, though.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the distinguished panelists, both for being here, your testimony, and for your leadership of our servicemen and women and their families. I did want to follow up on General Bolger's comments there. Based on my experience, recent experience, I led that Global Response Force Army element to Haiti. And as a quick prefacing remark, let me just say that I have full faith that all the services are dealing with the significant challenges of reset. And I know that they're hard choices, prioritization, and that we're trying to recapitalize our fleet. We're trying to restore the balance to the force and all the emotional and mental challenges that go with resetting the soldier, sailor, airman, Marine as well. But my concern about readiness has more to do with how you all interrelate. You know, when I led that unit to Haiti, the challenges we had had to do with lift, having the capability to get our forces there, to meet that mission, and then to have the enablers to come in a synchronized manner. All services came to the fore to respond to the President's request, but there were issues with how we synchronized the assets and certainly how we got the assets to get there. So my question really is how often, you alluded to you get together often, how often do you speak about this, about when you talk about readiness? I'm not talking about all that hard work you do to get your own services ready. How much discussion is there about CONOPS, about how you put together the suite of forces so that we can respond in a joint manner, which we know is the way we're going to respond? And how much have we learned from the Haitian experience?
Sir, I'll start off and then defer to my colleagues, but I would mention that jointness is really critical to everything we do. We couldn't function without it. Soldiers in particular, I mean, we need a ride everywhere we're going, and thank God we got the Air Force, the Navy to give us that ride. You mentioned the Haiti experience, a short notice deployment with a force. You know, your force was ready to go, but at great hazard and great challenge to get them ready. And the other services are just as stressed by worldwide operations, as you heard my colleagues say. I think this is why it's really, really important that we continue our pace of modernization and continue to get all the services on a sustainable rate of operations and dwell, because that's what gives you the time to do the joint training and education you need to gain those capabilities. For us as the operations deputies, this is one of the things we've looked at, and of course, as you know, one of the things we're looking at right now is how to keep the hard-won gains of jointness since the Goldwater-Nichols reforms of the 1986, how to keep them going with the lessons learned from the current conflict and what we foresee as our challenges in the future. And that is something we do discuss quite a bit. It's often a subject of operations deputies meetings, and we definitely do bring in folks on things like Haiti and say, what did we learn from that? You know, what went right, what went wrong, what can we do to mitigate these gaps, sir?
And now we're going to go to Mr. Kissel from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and kind of follow up to the questions and comments just made. Maybe a little bit of a plug to my colleagues. The Army is working on a CODEL for a one-day trip to Fort Bragg. I think in June, I believe, Chris, in June, that will feature a lot of this global response capability. We refer to Fort Bragg as being the center of the universe. And Special Ops is there, Special Forces are there. 10% of all the Army will soon be based there, with several commands and 34 flag officers there. So the most flag officers outside of the Pentagon, which I think a lot of our members might be able to learn a lot about this readiness component that we have in the global context. And as we get more information, we'll pass that around. But obviously, in my question, I want to preface real quickly, the most important assignment that we have is where our men and women are in harm's way. And that's where our attention should be, and making sure that we do everything we can to minimize the threats there and support those men and women. But obviously, as the chairman said, we're looking to the future, and this series of hearings is upon readiness. The chairman read over a series of numbers that actually made me feel a little bit young to hear how old some of our equipment is. I'm going to ask each one of you, and feel free to be brief in your answer. As the chairman said, one of the most important things we can have is information, to know what you're thinking, what your thoughts are. And so I'm going to ask each of you to respond. What is the biggest deficiency that we face right now as we get ready for future challenges? And once again, feel free to be brief.
Sir, I'll start off. The biggest deficiency is time. As much as we enjoy good modernization and we have programs, it's time to train and integrate, put the great people we have together and have time to prepare for full spectrum operations. And I think you'd hear that same thing from any of our sergeants or any of our officers as they prepare that training. They really need the time not to focus on the Afghan fight or the Iraq stability operations, but to focus on that full spectrum and integration.
Sir, I would echo that. I think we have spent 10 years doing what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've got to get that right, and we've got to win. But as I said in my opening statement, the full spectrum and the points that the chairman brought up referenced the growth of, for example, the PRC and their forces, and that's just one of them, and there are many more that have spent a lot of time expanding. So our modernization and our ability to operate in an anti-access air denial environment, in a degraded environment for electromagnetic spectrum, all those are things that we in Iraq and Afghanistan are pretty comfortable with the fact that anything more than about 6 feet off the ground we own, and we don't have to worry about our space capability because it's pretty well, there's not a lot of threat. But that won't be the case wherever we go next. And those are the things that I think that, and it's time, it's practice, it's concentration, it's modernization of the systems, and I know Bruce will probably mention this, but the air-sea battle, the construct that the Department of Navy and the Department of the Air Force put together, those are the things that we've really got to move. We've got to take, our belief is we really have to go to the next level in joint. We don't need to be joint, we need to be integrated. We need to go cross domains to make things happen.
Admiral?
Sir, I have to echo my shipmates here. Time. The Navy has been operating for the last 3 years at a pace that's equivalent to our surge capacity. That has come at a cost where we've been deployed forward so much that the time available for maintenance has resulted in a degrade in material readiness, and the time available for training has caused us to constrain our training to mission tailored as opposed to the full range of military operations. So as we look forward, we would need time. And I might say as well that the rate of the stress on the force would be a little bit less if we were at our aspiration of 313 ships or so as a floor for the force structure.
Okay. General?
Sir, I would probably report out that in my judgment, jointness across the board is very good. Me and my colleagues here, I think we work together to achieve joint solutions in every instance. One of the ways we do that is through the Global Force Management Board that routinely meets to discuss how forces are going to be used, where they're going to be used, and what the economies of scale can be to address a given situation. The Marine Corps is postured uniquely, perhaps, with the United States Navy in a more than a joint partnership. It's family, and that's evidenced in recent experience where with the repositioning of the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, a requirement to reinforce that unit with a battalion became manifest to address the scenario that's developing off the coast of Libya. 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, within 20 hours of receiving the execute order, deployed to Ceuta Bay and cross-decked to the amphibious ships and are now positioned off the coast of Libya. They did that because they are inherently a team that is task organized and can very quickly in an agile fashion adapt to the situation. However, I mentioned in my earlier brief about my earlier comments about home station equipment sets. That's becoming an increasingly more important issue with us. As you probably know, a little bit different from the Army, when Marines deploy, we take our gear forward with us. For example, as the Marines came out of Operation Iraqi Freedom, 40% of the equipment that was in Iraq was transferred to Afghanistan without the benefit of a full refurbishment or reset. So that gear is still forward, and it's undergoing the wear and the tear that's typically associated with combat operations. So a lengthy answer to your question, but the equipment reset is indeed a priority.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kissel. And now the chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to go back to kind of your original comments and generals for all of you. I think every member of this committee wants you to have everything that you need to support the war fighter. And yet, as we look at February's numbers, we had an $8 billion a day deficit. That's approximately an aircraft carrier a day, if I understand the pricing correctly. When we asked DOD for proposals and information, on one hand, we understand that we need additional dwell time for our soldiers, yet we know that they've proposed to reduce the number of soldiers in the Army by approximately 27,000, the number of soldiers in the Marines by 15,000. We don't have the ships that we need. We don't have the planes that we need. We don't have the vehicles or the equipment that we need. And I guess as someone who's been here for in Congress for less than 3 months, my question is, what's wrong with the procurement process at DOD? How do we fix it? Because we cannot sustain an $8 billion a day deficit in this country. And as you answer those questions, I'd like for you to tell me if you think that the national debt and deficit spending is a threat to our security as a country as well. Thank you.
Sir, thanks for that question. I'll go first, and I would say that I think the national debt and the deficit is a concern to all American citizens, whether they're in uniform right now or not, and I know it is for me. And sir, your question about procurement and the need for procurement reform, I think what we'd say is procurement as written now is designed about making it perfect in every regard as we can, and we've probably made it too complicated. And I think we need to settle for just good enough. I know for the Army in particular in this war, we've brought a lot of things on through our operational needs statement, which doesn't go through the normal procurement process from small business and from others, good ideas. Maybe of 10 good ideas that are brought to a unit, maybe 8 of them don't work, but 2 of them do. And among those good ideas that we're currently using today in Afghanistan and Iraq that came to us courtesy of a Marine Corps program like that is the mine resistance ambush protected vehicle series that are keeping our soldiers alive on operations, our Marines, our sailors, our airmen who are on the ground. So I think there's great merit in looking at those so-called operational need or joint operational needs programs as a way ahead for procurement reform, and I hope we will do that. And then, sir, the other thing I'd mention, you mentioned the proposed reduction of soldiers. There were 2 really important caveats on that I think the Secretary of Defense wisely put on that. And the first was timing. It's set for the year 2015, which is 4 years from now. That's close in budget and programming terms, but it is a bit distant in terms of strategic and what may happen in the world. So I think we've left ourselves the opportunity to revisit that if the world conditions alter. And then the second point is that not only is it close in that regard, the number is not great by itself. Our active duty strength is set at 547,400, and this would represent about 5% of that. So with 4 years to prepare, I think we can give the best range of options to you all and to our chain of command as to what type of reduction may make sense based on the world situation, sir.
Thank you, General.
Well, sir, I'd agree and echo much of what Dan said. Clearly, in my opinion, our economy and our national debt is a national security issue. And I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind, certainly in uniform and all Americans, that our economy is one of our strengths. It's also something that we have to protect. And I would agree with you 1,000%. On the procurement side and acquisition side, sir, I think all the things that bureaucracy does can sometimes inflate costs. I think there's and I'm not a procurement or an acquisition expert, that's That's why they let us be the op steps, because we're probably not as good at acquisition. But I think that the point of we have a tendency sometimes to go to the exquisite, and we can't afford to go to the exquisite. So I think good enough is exactly as Dan said is right. I think there's an economies of scale. I think there's stability in a program that allows it to go through a process. I think sometimes impatience on part of a variety of audiences, be it a consumer in a warfighter or job creation, whatever. There's a lot of people that will create impatience, and sometimes that causes problems in your programs as you move forward. And I couldn't agree more that we've got to get it right, and we've got to fix the procurement and acquisition process in the Department of Defense if we're going to be able to maintain the level of feeling of our combat forces that we need for the future.
Thank you, Joe.
Sir, in regard to the deficit spending, as we as a nation all equally concerned about that challenge go forward to develop solutions. From at least my personal perspective, the Department of Defense and certainly the Navy budget is carrying a level of risk this year, FY12, and in the out years as we look at that. That would cause me to suggest that one of the solutions to the deficit spending that I would not advise is to diminish DOD and certainly the Navy's budget. I think the Secretary of Defense has said that 12 is a reduction from what we thought would be an increase, but still an increase, and then as we begin to plan in the out years, it's pretty flat. But to cause a decline, I think, at a time when we're trying to reset and reconstitute the force and meet an evolving security environment that's going to invite multiple concurrent diverse crises, would in fact increase risk. Regarding procurement, we understand and have been working for a number of years to address that. I believe part of 12's budget across all services was to increase the cadre of procurement professionals. And certainly we're looking to do that in the Navy, as well as continue and enhance very rigorous oversight. Just one example of the type of oversight that's in my lane is the requirement. What is the capability requirement to make sure that we can generate the effects necessary on the battlefield that the nation expects of us? And so we don't gold watch them as we might have in the beginning of my career. We're looking for parity or overmatch sufficient to match the capacity equation. And so we're taking a holistic approach to resolving the procurement challenges that we face.
So your second question first. I think all of us share concern with respect to the budget deficit and the implications that it has long term. To your question or your comment with respect to end strength, I would like to just comment on the fact that as this war progressed, both the Army and the Marine Corps were authorized to grow the force in order to meet the threat that was seen as confronting our nation. And the Marine Corps began in 2007, and in fact, although we achieved the numbers, the end strength, we're still in the process of forming units, and we'll round out in FY12 to complete the Grow to Force initiative. Having said that, in August, our Commandant directed that we meet and we look deep, we look downrange to consider how we might posture ourselves for the future. And based on his direction, we gathered and conducted an internally driven force structure review, leveraging the lessons learned over the course of 10 years of combat in order to figure how we might posture ourselves better in the future, how we do more with less, and how we can leverage the capabilities of technology and the operating battlefield environment today to accomplish our mission. With respect to procurement, I'm not a programmatic guy. But I would say I think we're informed to a certain extent with the urgent, unfilled requirements, the urgent UNS process that manifested over the course of the Iraq and now the Afghan conflict that facilitated the acquisition of gear that was needed on the battlefield quickly. And I know that the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is examining exactly the kind of question that you just posed to us to determine how we might better streamline process and accelerate acquisition to achieve the kind of products that we need, the reliable kind of products that we need to succeed in the battlefield.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman for his questions. The gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin with General Boger, primarily because your statement is the only one that referenced it, and I'd like the other generals and admirals to respond to it as well. On page 3 of your statement, you made an interesting comment about the concept of a versatile force mix characteristic. We sort of touched upon it earlier, and that is, of course, using the Guard as well as the reserves to sort of, I guess, define readiness, and that's what you're looking into the future, I understand your statement is saying, as to how we would then meet readiness requirements. What I'm curious about is, for example, the Guard. Adjutant generals are basically state appointments. It's a jurisdictional issue, first of all. Secondly, there's funding considerations, that which the state governments may pay for, that which the federal government pays for. So in your perception, or in how you feel we're moving to this new joint mix force, how do you anticipate actually coming to address jurisdictional concerns, and how are they going to work side by side? Guard units are permanent, for one thing. Yours rotate, for another. So how do we do this? I understand dwell time. I'm just curious about how you anticipate seeing this actually fulfilled for the future in terms of readiness.
Ma'am, I think that's a great question, a great point, and exactly one of the challenges we're looking at is we refer to it as converting the Guard and Reserve from a strategic reserve, in other words, a force that's primarily gaining readiness, but you'd use it only in the event of a very major conflict, you know, the Cold War, World War III type scenario. We're talking about now it being an operational reserve, and we actually learned a lot from our brothers and sisters in the Air Force on this. The Air Guard and the Air Reserve have been integrated in the Air Force for quite a while, and they also had to deal with the challenges of state duty versus federal duty. And so mirroring a little of what they learned and then modifying it naturally for the needs of ground forces, we think what we do is we're going to prioritize it so that we can serve the governors and the adjutants general. So if, for example, we give a predicted schedule that says 5 years from now, your brigade that's normally available in your state is going to be rotated in and do combat duty in Afghanistan. The governor then has time for he or she and their team to look at that, know that's coming up, and then I think make the prudent arrangements for who's going to pick that duty up. And I think some of the things that have been recommended, and these are cases we have seen, there's a Army Reserve as well that does not have a state duty, but sometimes they're available. Could there be an arrangement, a task organization that would tell the governor, look, these active component forces, these Army Reserve forces will be available to fill the gap while your combat brigade is deployed? Because I think, ma'am, that's the real concern at the state level, and I think rightly so, for our homeland missions. The other thing that helps us, ma'am, is the reorganization that the Department of Defense did when they established U.S. Northern Command and their strong relation to a strengthened National Guard Bureau, because our number one priority is always Homeland Defense. We don't always put most of our forces against it, but should a Homeland Defense issue occur, everything goes to that first. And I think that was one of the big lessons after 9/11, although most of that was handled by local and state elements. So we're looking very closely at that, man. But I think it's a fundamental responsibility that goes back to the founding of America with the militia versus the active forces, the regular forces. And I think it's one that we really got a great opportunity to make some good changes right now because we've got a very veteran Guard and Reserve. They don't require the great amount of training and mobilization time they might have needed when they were less well equipped or less well trained. They're as veteran now as they've ever been in the Army. And I think it really gives us opportunity to solve these challenges that in many cases have existed for quite a while, ma'am.
Thank you. And I do know that the Air Force has done it very successfully. So if you would, General, if you would respond to that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I think we are, in the United States Air Force, in some ways our mission is uniquely suited to have a mutual capability. And to be honest, we could not we, the United States Air Force, could not conduct our mission without our Guard and Reserve partners, and it's every part of the mission. The depends on the mission set, air superiority alert, air defense alert that we sit in Hawaii with 154th, for example, or the ASA folks that are scattered and doing an incredible job throughout the nation for homeland defense. Those are, the Title 10, Title 32 question you asked about, but we've worked it out very well. They're on Title 32 orders till the klaxon goes off, and the minute the klaxon goes off, they're on Title 10, and they're doing the mission for NORTHCOM or PACOM in Hawaii. So we've worked our way through some of that, and we're sharing everything we have with our brethren here. But it is a unique capability in a lot of ways because of our mission set. The other thing that I think is that we've gone into the total force enterprise in the case of KC-135s and F-22s, where part of the squadron's Guard, part of it's active. You have an amazing amount of flexibility when you build total force enterprise like that. And we still have a lot to learn. There's things we need to do. And there's other missions where it's predominantly state. If we have C-130s in the center part of the country that can do firefighting in the fire season, the ability to back those guys up and send more planes out with that capability is, again, those are things that we can continue to work on. But whether it's the attributes that the Guard and Reserve bring with respect to continuity, which is incredibly valuable, experience, because they're generally very experienced, very good at what they do. I'll tell you, in my previous job in the 13th Air Force Commander, that organization could not operate without the Guard and the 109th in the background and supporting us all the time. So I think we're fortunate in our ability to do that.
Ma'am, thank you for your question. We have it a little bit easier not having a Guard force, and so we have embarked in the last decade on a total force concept where we size and shape the active and reserve components in concert with each other. And we look at what our current demands are, and we assess what the demand will be in the future security environment, and we size and shape the reserve component on a real-time basis to make sure that the total force can respond to the requirements that we anticipate. We also employ our reserve forces, whether we're involved in a conflict or not, day to day, as they augment various activities that we have ongoing. So that keeps them refreshed and able to add value when they're called upon.
Ma'am, like the Navy, we have no National Guard, as you all know. We have a total force concept with our reserve community and have had a total force concept for a number of years. Our reserve, Selected Marine Corps Reserve, is 39,600 strong. I alluded to a force structure review earlier, and just for a point of clarification, our reserve establishment will remain at 39,600. There will be no change, no impact on our reserve force. We also tailor our reserve component so that it complements the active duty structure that we have. We bring complete units onto active duty. They train at our installations. They train side by side with the active duty forces. And we also utilize some of the unique capabilities in terms of manpower to bring reserves forward for individual augments to fill joint manning documents and the like.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schilling, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your gentleman's service to this great nation. This past weekend I was actually in Afghanistan and got to see some of the great work that's happening there. Myself and 4 other members of Congress had the opportunity to walk through a city called Marja, which a little over a year ago our men and women couldn't land there without taking fire. And we didn't even have to wear vests. So, I just want to thank you for that and the work that's going on over there. I understand the folks are getting kind of burnt out. Lots of tours going across, and I think a lot of it comes down to giving them the break and making sure the families are taken care of. And constitutionally, that is our job as the Congress, is to make sure we're well protected, that our money is spent properly, and You know, I think that the one thing that I look at is the defense of this nation is huge, because a lot of the other issues that we're dealing with today don't really matter if we don't have a good defense system. So I look at it as a top priority to make sure that things are spent properly. And then looks like I get the buzzer now. You know, I think that when I visited with several of the troops there, they were all very positive, upbeat, and some of them, you know, had been over there for quite some time. And, you know, I guess we look, you know, to you folks to just kind of help direct us and just help us make good, solid decisions on supporting the troops, their families. You know, I know I had a personal experience with one of the guys that came back. He'd been back home for a couple of years, and about 2 months ago, he ended up taking his life. And it wasn't because of going in and serving in the military. It was, you know, there's a broken home and things like that. But, you know, I think that there's a lot of things that we're taking note of, and we are focusing our efforts into fixing that. But, you know, I just want to thank you for what we're doing. And, you know, I think with the financial condition of the country, you know, every penny that we spend, you know, the one thing that I was talking to one of my colleagues about yesterday is the fact that when China spends a dollar, they know that dollar, every penny of it's being spent properly, and you know, that's the one thing that we have an obligation to the citizens to do, is make sure we spend it properly, and look forward to just working with y'all. Thank you. Yield back.
We'll thank the gentleman, and the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for all that you're doing. With all we've been hearing about readiness and our desire, our joint effort to make sure that we are ready and that we're fully equipped and our country is going to be safe in the years to come. I know we've got lots of challenges with equipment and dwell time and other issues, but at the same time, we're also approaching changing a major policy within the military. The repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and I want to get your thoughts about some of those things. First of all, with this proposal as it's coming forth, what changes to facilities are you contemplating in order to address privacy concerns of service members, and what's the cost going to be for that?
Ma'am, I'll start out with that. As you know, right now, at the direction of the President and the Secretary of Defense, pursuant to the Act of Congress that was signed last December, we're carrying out the training to train our force right now, and then provide an assessment. Our services will provide their best military advice back on what we think those implications will be as we complete this policy change. I will tell you right now, ma'am, that we're anticipating no changes to facilities. The Army recognizes two sexes, male and female. Sexual orientation neutral. That's whatever. And our goal will be the same, that standards of conduct will not change. And what we've found in our training so far, for folks my age, it's quite concerning in many cases. For folks the age of my son or daughter, they don't know what we're talking about and why it's a big deal. And the ones in the military are more concerned about their next deployment to Afghanistan or Iraq, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. So, but you say right now, is the policy now that men and women service members who have opposite sex attraction shower together and room together, sleep together? Is that the policy now in the facilities?
Ma'am, right now the policy that we have is that males live with males and females live with females. We can make an exception for that in combat, and we do. If, you know, a crew of a vehicle or something like that has mixed sex.
Why do you have that separation?
I'm sorry, ma'am?
Why do you have separation between facilities between men and women?
Right now, really just for privacy reasons.
Okay. So we're getting ready to change the policy so people with same-sex attraction are being able to shower together and to sleep in the same area. So why wouldn't we have separate facilities in those cases?
Well, ma'am, part of it is because basically you're not allowed to act out on your inclinations or interests without the permission of the other person. I mean,
And
the
why
military
would we have men and
doesn't allow
women,
that.
servicemen and women sleeping in the same areas and
Well,
showering?
well, ma'am, they do not shower together, but they do sleep in the same areas routinely. I mean, that's very common. And we make normal privacy arrangements because when you're living very close to somebody, you still, one of the biggest challenges, of course, and I say this as an infantry guy with almost 33 years service, is to have any kind of personal space in that kind of an environment. And so people try to allow a little time for somebody to read a letter or for somebody to clean up or something like that without hassling when they can avoid it. So we are used to that. That's one of the things you learn from when you first come into service.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear from the other services. What changes to facilities do you anticipate and what the cost would be?
Ma'am, much like the Army, as we work our way through it, and I will take for record and come back with more specifics, but because it's not primarily in my area of responsibility within the Department of the Air Force. But in talking with as we implement this, our intent is very similar in that we will provide privacy, but additional facilities additional facilities are splitting things out to where you have 4 different groups of people that have to maintain separation. That is not our intent, as far as I know right now. Again, I'll come back with more information as you need it. And I would agree with Dan that the common refrain, and we all think about the turbulence and what it's going to cause, but to a large extent, the younger folks, it was don't ask, don't tell, don't care. In a lot of cases, was the refrain because they don't necessarily understand it. They've grown up in a different world than we grew up in. So,
okay. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. The Navy policy is no change to facilities and therefore no related cost. The facilities are based on gender, not sexual orientation.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, that's consistent with the Department of Defense policy. The Marine Corps policy is the same. The focus for successful implementation, in our judgment, is to concentrate on leadership, professionalism, discipline, and respect.
Okay. Why, I'd like all of you to address how you think that this change will improve the all-volunteer force and not undermine morale, discipline, readiness, recruiting, and retention.
Ma'am, I would offer that the all-volunteer force represents the America that it's drawn from, and that it's important that all Americans feel like that the military that we're putting on the battlefield is their military.
Ma'am, I would echo what has been said by others. It's about professionalism. It's about professional courtesy and respect for one another regardless. And I think I can give you my opinion with respect to what I think it'll do to the force. I don't think any of us know right now. I think the time will tell. Having said that, I think if you recruit and retain professional, respectful people, it won't degrade our force at all.
Okay.
The fact is that the current force has a number of individuals with varying sexual orientations, and as we go to recruit, we recruit based on other things, performance and their capabilities and willingness to go do the missions. And so I don't expect that it's going to change the recruiting demographics particularly, and certainly within the service, once you've been inducted or whatever the case may be, it's all governed by standards of behavior which have not changed. So we don't consider in the Navy, based on the planning that we've done and the surveys we've done, that it will have a significant impact at all.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I think today's all-volunteer force is a tremendous success, and I wouldn't anticipate any changes to that in the future.
I would concur. We have a wonderful force right now, but I'm very concerned that we, in this time of war, are getting ready to change this radical policy where, just like you said, General, we do not know the implication of it. And so I have a lot of concerns, but thank you for your answers. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank the lady for her question. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a comment as far as long-term readiness, and then I'd like to re-engage the near-term readiness issue that we were dialoguing about earlier. You talk about readiness, of course, it begs the question, ready for what? One of the things that General Bulger mentioned in his early set of remarks, quite remarkable, that we've got soldiers right now in 100 countries. He made the point on time to get missions done and the need for staying power. When I'm back home in the district, my constituents really don't understand Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's my challenge. I take that on. I explain to them why it is that we need to stay. We can't afford to start a war that we don't finish. So it's my leadership responsibility to follow through on that. But I think going forward, we, the country, need to have a national dialogue. I think everyone on this committee, regardless of party, we are fully committed. We're going to protect our cherished way of life. But there are a variety of views and opinions as to what that means. And I'm of the mind that we have too many requirements. We're asking too much of our military right now. And, while I think we could all pass the civics test that we're a republic, not an empire, to me, when I look at the facts, we evidence an empire in terms of where we're laid down. So, going forward, this is a conversation I'm having with my colleagues right now as we look towards successfully completing our objectives in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the time is right to take a serious look at what does it mean to protect our cherished way of life as we go forward. I'd like to reengage the topic of near-term readiness. I appreciate all the responses that I received on that, and certainly acknowledge the readiness that was displayed as it relates to moving forces for any kind of potential response in Libya. But with regard to the Global Force Management Board, it is my view that we've got risk. We've got significant risk as it relates to the Global Response Force, the GRF, and of course that's in large measure because of we're resourcing the current fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. Please tell me a little bit more about how you go through that on a joint level and how you track the status of readiness among the forces, and what commitment do we have in the out years as far as exercises to ensure that we have a capability? Because I think the General was getting ready to make a remark about the C-17 availability. And so the question really, did you know, you probably did you know we had this shortfall? That if we got called, we weren't going to have the capability to move the Global Response Force. And going forward, how much situation awareness do we have about this challenge to readiness, to joint readiness deployability? Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thanks. I appreciate that question. I think it is. It's a question. You're exactly right. It's a question of managing risk and ready to do what, and that's your point. So I would reiterate that. I think in the case of when you look at what's demanded of the United States military today, realizing what we have done for the last decade in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's risk out there. There's risk to every part of our force. I don't think there's a part of our force that's not at risk. We spend an exhaustive amount of time, this crowd in particular, in the OPSTEPS tanks, and we go through global force management and hard-to-source solutions, and it is a joint solution. And we do turn to one another, and if it's direct support C-130s, trying to backfill CH-47s as much as we can. We can't do it across the board because they don't go to the same place all the time, but we do that. So we spend a lot of time working joint solutions to issues of how we manage the force in the near term. And to be honest, and I think it's been brought up before with our Army and Marine brethren in their engagements that they've had over the last decade, in a lot of cases, some of that's been Air Force and Navy backfill, whether it's joint expeditionary taskings or individual augmentees, and that's exactly what we need to do. I think that part of the risk that we have to realize is that we have incredible men and women in our military, and they're pretty adaptable and flexible. And you can take a computer technician from Lackland Air Force Base or Syracuse, and you can send them in to do a joint expeditionary tasking in support of a convoy, and they do great work for you. So I think we do look at joint solutions. We do look across services and the synergy we can do that, and we look to take advantage of our greatest asset, which is our people and their flexibility and adaptability.
I think, sir, building on what Hawk said, the jointness and the people aspect to me are the two great multipliers we have that allows us to get more out of the numbers of people and planes and ships and tanks and all the other things we have. And we have to look for opportunities to build on that. Anything we can do should always look to empower our folks. And I think one of the aspects that a little additional dwell time is going to give surely for the Army is the ability to get some of our folks back into their professional schooling and some of these broadening experiences where they may have a chance to come over and be an intern for you or something like that. Just give them a bigger picture than the world of kicking down the next door in a village in Afghanistan. And that part is important, but you've got to get that broader view. And I think as that generation, with all the skills they've shown and the multiple talents that Hawk referred to, as they take charge of our military, I think we're going to see them come up with some of these solutions. You know, it doesn't have to be top down, sir.
Yeah, and I appreciate those responses too. And Chairman, I'm just going to make about 10 or 15 seconds to close it up. The thing that's concerning to me is as we look at the potential threats that we face and we look at the global response force and we think about it in terms of joint command and control, joint fires, sustainment capability and mobility and strategic mobility, I think you'd agree we've got some risk in terms of identifying the joint forces required to address emerging circumstances. Now, in situations where we can move a fleet and we have a ground force with it, highly trained, motivated, disciplined Marine Corps, that's great. But when we have to go deeper, when we have to reach across and maybe go to the airborne forces, we need a way to convey that force. We need a way to sustain that force and to complement that force. And it's that joint packaging that's got me concerned in the near term. I know that that's on your radar screen, and I think it's important we communicate risk as we go forward in the near term and as we bridge towards what I hope is a more judicious view of the long term. And we're going to protect this cherished way of life. I yield back. Thanks very much.
Thank the gentleman. And the next individual for questions is a gentleman from Arkansas. And before he comes back in, General Tryon, I have a question for you, if I could, on pre-positioning of our stocks. How important is that to the Marines? Because one of the things that we are hearing today is that that's not that important, that we have just sustainment vessels, we can pull them back and we can be back to the fight in a week or two. You've seen that firsthand. How important are those pre-positioned stocks?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question. The Maritime Preposition Force is comprised of 3 squadrons that are forward deployed around the world, one in the Med, one in the Pacific, and one in the Indian Ocean. For the Marine Corps and for the program that we have, these are capability sets and not simply floating warehouses that you would draw supplies from. They're intentionally designed to support fly-in echelons and marry up so that formations can quickly assemble in a reception staging area and then complete their onward movement and take on whatever mission there might be there. This is a strategic program in my judgment. Having these forces, these assets, these resources forward deployed, I think is fundamentally important, not just to the organizational construct that the Marine Corps has and how we operate with them, but I think to the combatant commanders as well. It provides the combatant commanders with what is singularly their most important, it addresses singularly what their most important concern is, and that's responsiveness. And by having maritime preposition assets forward deployed, we have a far greater ability to respond in time to a crisis or a contingency.
And 2 questions on that. First one is, how important is time to you in that response? Capability.
Sure. I think time is always of the essence. You know, from the Marine Corps' ethos, first to fight, we can't get there fast enough. And so we want to make sure that we are where we need to be with what we need to have in order to carry the day. And the way we're organized and equipped and the way the resources that are located aboard the Maritime Preposition Squadrons are the way they are arranged, they complement our capability to forward deploy quickly.
If we did not have those stocks pre-positioned and we had the ships back in home port, is there a difference in timing between just the sail time to be able to get to wherever the destination is. In other words, how much time does it take to assemble the stocks that you would need on those vessels before they could move forward?
Sir, if a squadron is, for instance, back in the continental United States, east or west coast, obviously you would have to deal with whatever the tyranny of distance is between departing the United States and moving to wherever the crisis or the contingency area might be. Providing that the ships would remain loaded with the stockages that were required to support, that would minimize delay in moving them forward. But when we sacrifice time, we assume risk.
What if they did not keep those ships loaded?
So that would then require additional time in order to be able to load the vessels. And
could that be several weeks?
Sorry, it would depend on the squadron, but it would take a matter of time, and I can get back to you and tell you exactly what the load time for a squadron might be. Okay. It depends on port facilities. It depends on the type of ship. There's a number of factors associated with that.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this very informative hearing. Thank you all for your service. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate you, General Call. I'll mention in C-130, as you know, we have a lot of great ones in Little Rock in my district. General Bolger, I wanted to ask you, when you're dealing with the transition from a strategic reserve to operational reserve, can you talk a little bit about how you're going to balance the Guard's role in the states? That's particularly important in a state like Arkansas, where we have a lot of tornadoes and storms and things like that. And I know that they will continue to respond to civil incidents like that. But if you could provide a little guidance, I'm particularly interested in the training balance and how they accommodate that in light of a shift to an operational reserve.
Sir, that's a great question, and I think it comes down to the fundamental nature of the Guard having arisen out of the militia tradition of the United States, always ready for home service, and then, like the old Minutemen, and then deploying overseas when necessary. And our Guard in particular, and our Reserve too, have done a great job in that for the last decade for the Army. You mentioned the term operational. Old days, the Guard really and the Reserve were a strategic reserve. They were the force we called on when things really got big, and maybe in the Cold War when we were looking at a major World War III type scale of conflict. So now we use about 70,000 Guardsmen and Reservists on active duty today, every day, really, keeping them on active duty, a good number deployed overseas. And so how do we balance that with the Governor's needs and expectations that their Guard would be available in the event of a state emergency or a natural disaster? Two things we've done that I think are helping us in that area, sir. The first is trying to get the Guard and Reserve, the Guard in particular for state duty, on a predictable schedule of deployment, which is to say about 4 years at home for every year deployed. If a governor knew that he or she would have that Guard available for 4 years out of 5, then they know at least that 80% of the time is covered with a trained, ready unit that knows the state and that lives there and is ready to go. And I think our Guard has done really, really well in these homeland tests. And then what about the year where they're going to get mobilize, deploy, and deploy overseas? I think this brings us to the second point. Secretary McHugh and General Casey actually commissioned a study led by General Dennis Reimer, one of our former Armored Chiefs of Staff. Lieutenant General Roger Schultz, Lieutenant General Helmley helped them out with this. They were key leaders in the Guard and Reserve. And they came back and they said, we need to look at a way to create more of a total force for homeland missions as well. Maybe we can see a future with some changes to how we task organize, where the governor, he or she might have available, if their Guard brigade was deployed, they could have Army Reserve forces resident in that state, which are federal forces in reserve. They could have active Army units resident in that state. And all that would come together. And so, of course, we've had some great and hard-won lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina, from Hurricanes Gustav and Ike, from flooding as recently as this month in the United States, where we're seeing some opportunities there to really get a better homeland force. And so I would underscore that in the direction we've received from the President and the Secretary of Defense, Homeland Defense is the #1 responsibility of the Department of Defense. And normally our forces are not doing that every day, but they're all available. And should an event occur in the homeland, just as we saw after 9/11, everything will head that direction until that event is dealt with, sir.
Sure. I got in the reserve in 1996. I'm still in the reserve now, and I can tell you there's a clear difference between the 1996 strategic reserve and the operational now, and particularly in terms of readiness. We call this readiness subcommittee. I don't think I'd ever heard the word readiness until post 9/11 in the reserve, and everything changed. So I know exactly what you're talking about there. I want to ask you about an issue that is more about, it's about personnel, not equipment, and that's OERs, officer evaluations. To some extent, NCOERs as well for non-commissioned officers, but I'm particularly interested in our leaders and how they are rated. I am waiting on an OER now as I'm leaving my reserve unit. So I have written and rated folks. So I am intimately familiar with OERs. And there was a great article in the Atlantic magazine about a month ago, and it talked about John Noggle and a bunch of the really sharp military leaders who have gotten out of the Army. And I know that we have taken steps, particularly in the last decade or 5 years, to be more innovative, to encourage the cliche outside the box thinking. I saw that firsthand when I went to Fort Dix to phase 1 of ILE. Instead of a lecture format where you just sit, take notes, and listen to an officer, you sit in a sort of a horseshoe. You're given all these hypotheticals. You're encouraged to think and to dialogue, and it's really, it was actually surprising to me to see that kind of freedom in thinking and in structure in the military, and I was encouraged by it because I thought that it was teaching folks how to think instead of how to memorize some things that they would probably soon forget. So I know that y'all have, that there's been an evolution. I know we're making progress, but I think the way that people are rated, and I'm just sort of laying this predicate so you can comment on it. I think the way people are rated and then the way they're assigned is of concern to me. The Atlantic article mentioned that first of all, as I've seen on the OER side, you see just all sorts of inflation where no one gets any negative comments, because a negative comment, God forbid, completely ruins their career. So you get at least good things said about you, and then if you did a really good job, you get extraordinary things said about you. But if nothing bad, because then your career's dead, particularly as an officer, particularly as a field grade officer. So the artificiality of the OER process is a concern to me. On the assignment side, what concerns me is, and the Atlantic article, I commend it to you if you haven't read it, but it talks about the fact that commanders don't have the ability to develop relationships with individual soldiers and seek those individual soldiers out on a routine basis for assignment. You get to know a soldier, you see that they are well suited for this position or that position. You seek them out and say, this is the one I want. Now, there may be some of that at your level. You probably have the ability to get whoever you want working for you. But down at particularly at the company grade level and moving into the field grade level, those assignments sometimes seem random. They don't seem connected with the history of the individuals involved. And so I would just ask if you could to comment on that, and I'd welcome anybody's comments on this, because I think that this is, a lot of these leaders in the Army go on to lead in the civilian world. Sometimes, though, we lose them too soon from the military, and they get out, not because they're ready to get out and they've had a fulfilling career, but Many times they're ready to get out because they're frustrated with the system. And if you would address that, sorry for the long question, but if you would address that, I'd appreciate it.
No, sir, I think it's actually a very fundamental question because the military is all about people. And our goal really, as you know, is when anybody joins the Army, we see every soldier, every private as a potential leader. And whether they stay in and become non-commissioned officers or warrant officers or commissioned officers, or whether they do their time and get out with an honorable discharge and go to civil life, in any case, we think we have some leader development responsibilities to everyone, and we really do. So even in our basic training, even in our very low-level training, there's some of those folks who get leadership responsibilities, and we encourage that because, as we've seen over and over in the current fight, it really is a couple of privates first class or a young sergeant who are often having to make some very, very critical decisions that can have strategic implications. You mentioned our evaluation, our officer evaluation. The current one's been around for about over 20 years, and we're about due to relook it. In fact, General Casey has directed that we come back with some options on some changes we may need to make, and maybe expand the way we do evaluations. At least for the Army, we're still pretty traditional in the sense that you're evaluated by your chain of command, your immediate commander, and then one commander one level up. There's some thought that maybe you need to get some peer feedback involved in that. There's some thought that maybe we need to hear from subordinates. You know, get a what would be called in industry a 360-degree view. Now, how you do that in a hierarchical organization with a uniform code of military justice, we'd have to work our way through that. But I think we've got an innovative enough force so we can come up with some options there, sir. And since you've got some views on that, I'll take back to our task force to come see you because you've got some unique perspectives where you're at now. And sort of the final comment had to do sort of with, for want of a better term, what makes a young person stay in the military. And the answer is unique to every man and woman, but I think for the people who reach that crossroad when they decide to stay in or get out, it really has to do with one thing. Am I making a difference? Does the Army think that what I'm doing is doing something? I think some people think it's because of money or because of rank or because of getting an award. I don't think that's it. I think folks, they come in and they swear in front of the American flag and they know it's an important task they do when they put on a uniform. And they want to make that contribution. And I think it's incumbent on us in our leader development to give them that opportunity to use their talents, sir.
General, thank you for that, and we thank the gentleman from Arkansas for his service. And if you have any other thoughts, if you could get back with the gentleman, I know he would love to work with you.
I would like to work with you, yes,
on doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General, we just have a couple of questions left, and just like to, since you've got the microphone warmed up, General Bolger, I'll just ask you. You have a unique perspective on jointness. That was a question that was asked a little bit earlier because you were Chief Strategy Division, J8, and later you were Director of Strategy Analysis, J5 at Joint Forces Command. How important is jointness to the Army? And when the flag goes down on the Joint Forces Command, who will have the legal authority to put together the teams within the services that the Joint Forces Command currently has?
Sir, I think that's a great question. Jointness for us really, and this has been long-standing in the American military. I mean, you can go all the way back to our origins when we were first working with the Army and the Navy, the Marines, and then got the Air Force as an independent service after World War II. It's absolutely critical. No single service of the United States can carry out tasks by itself. We need the team, and we're representative of a much larger team, obviously. You're right, sir. I had the privilege to serve at Joint Forces Command and to see that in action, because that command is charged with really enhancing and strengthening jointness across the force. And I think the proof is in the operations. I mean, the things that we've been able to carry out since the Goldwater-Nichols reform with Joint Forces Command, in many cases providing leadership, and the services themselves working well together under the Joint Staff and the OSD, I think we've been able to achieve a lot. And I think, sir, your question that you asked that's really important is, as Joint Forces Command is disestablished and their responsibilities are put elsewhere, who really brings the team together? And, sir, I mean, my understanding of the law is that the statutory authority rests with the Secretary of Defense. Always has, I mean, and obviously with the President as well.
The Secretary obviously can't do that on a day-to-day basis like the Joint Forces Command did.
Yes, sir.
Does it rest anywhere else?
Sure, it does. Combatant commanders have that authority right now.
To shift between services?
They do. For example, in Central Command, General Mattis can make task organization changes as necessary. General Ham, who just took over Africa Command, is making some significant ones right now as he postures for potential contingencies in North Africa. So that is a combatant commander. That responsibility is delegated to them from the President and the Secretary of Defense. And that's one of the reasons Joint Forces Command in particular was a command that had a great deal of utility in the time that it was there. We are currently in the middle of preparing plans to make sure that the core capabilities of Joint Forces Command are preserved. And I think, sir, we may have to come back to you all through the, obviously through our service departments and through the Secretary of Defense on potential authorities or something that may need to shift as that organization transitions from being a combatant command to whatever it is when we're complete with this this execution.
One last question on that. You talked about the teams. One of the teams that's been put together very uniquely has been the team at Joint Forces Command in terms of their ability to do jointness. Did you know of any other place in the world that has that unique set of individuals that have that kind of experience and expertise in doing that?
So I think you make a really good point. It's not only, it's unique in the United States Armed Forces, it is unique worldwide among our allies. As you know, many of our allies come through Supreme Allied Command Transformation, which is headquartered in Norfolk, to work with us in that joint environment and to understand our hard-won lessons that go all the way back to the World Wars and such, what we've learned about operating in that joint environment. That workforce that lives in that area is very, very unique, and I can tell you, at least in the planning we're doing so far, sir, that's a strong consideration. How do we keep the core of that team together? How do we maintain that hard-won expertise? How do we continue to build it for the future? Because jointness will be just as important a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now as it is today, sir.
Thank you, General Carlisle. Just a quick question for you. You saw the charts we had on China, and one of the things we worried about is the modernization of our Air Force. You have to watch those airmen get in those planes and defend freedom around the world. How concerned are you with our readiness capabilities when we look at the growing modernization of China's military and what we should be expecting for that in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great question, and I think my brother here, my shipmate Bruce, would add this. You know, certainly in the air component or the cross-domain space component, cyberspace component, air, maritime, we look at where they're putting so many of their resources, and it is a big concern because for the last 10 years our focus has been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and theirs has been on modernizing. I mean, that's a statement of fact, and they're doing it in subsurface, they're doing it in their surface fleet, they're doing it in their air, they're doing it in their space and counter space capability as well as the known cyberspace. So it is a very big concern, and I think Admiral Willard probably thinks about it every day when he gets up and every night when he goes to bed. I think that with respect to readiness, I think that our qualitative advantage that we still possess, despite their rolling out of their newest airplane in our legacy and new systems, is our current hedge against what they're doing. I believe our future, a successful F-35 program for all the services, a successful long-range strike capability, a successful SSBN and DDG fleet, all those things are critical as we move forward. And this is a time, I believe, with respect to future readiness, that as we make this transition and as we back out of the forces out of Iraq and we look to investments in the future, and given the economy and the deficit that we have to deal with, we've got to do those right in how we modernize into the future so that we can still maintain our influence throughout the world that we have today. So it's I mentioned the other day to you, Mr. Chairman, you can't make them 10 feet tall because they're not, but you also can't disregard them. There's an area there where you have to pay very, very close attention to what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what we'll do to maintain our capability to influence and maintain our capability in particular in that part of the world.
Thank you, General. One last question from me, and then I think Ms. Burdell has one final question. Admiral, one of the concerns we all have, and you and I have talked about this, is with ship maintenance. And we're looking at FY10, we had a $200 million shortfall. We don't have an FY11. FY12, we're looking at about $367 million shortfall. At what point, with all of the surge times that you were talking about earlier with the deferred maintenance that we have, do we start becoming concerned that we need to have a reevaluation of the service life of the vessels that we have?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. We obviously look to share risk across the Navy's entire portfolio, and one of the areas that we're reluctant to share risk in is the maintenance, because we are absolutely dedicated to getting our fleet to its expected service life. Since 2009 through the 2012 budget, we've added $800 million to the maintenance program. We've shifted manpower from staffs and units back to the ships themselves and to the shore-based maintenance so that we can address this. We've increased our planning capacity, and we've developed class maintenance plans, and within that, individual ship plans. So we have put ourselves on a path which didn't begin this year, but frankly a year or two ago, to make sure that we can plan and execute maintenance with more precision and finely tuned to get those ships into the condition they need to be. That doesn't mean that the shortfall doesn't concern us, and as we look at a couple of drivers, the continuing resolution will put us behind the expected maintenance and therefore the material condition of some number of ships. I mentioned 29 of 85 availabilities, if the continuing resolution goes through the balance of this year, will not be accomplished. That will backwave or a backlog into what we had in terms of shortfalls for fiscal year 12. And as we look out to the coming years, that was why I mentioned earlier the Secretary's funding profile in regard to lessening the increase this year and then flattening in the out years was what we thought was a righteous contribution to the nation's deficit challenges. If we were to find a decline in the DoD or Navy budget in this particular case, we would be concerned again about our ability to maintain the ships and get them to service life, considering the balance of the portfolio that has equal requirements as well.
Just want to elaborate on that answer just a little bit if I could, and then Ms. Bordello, you have the final question. Explain to me, if you would, the impact in terms of lost maintenance capabilities in dollars that we would have if the continuing resolution continues. And then help me explain to other members of Congress who tell me the Navy is coming in and telling us that they are going to have this enormous problem on the CR if they don't get that, if that continues with maintenance, and that's going to be horrible, but they're not so worried about the $567 million shortfall that was budgeted and the impact that that's going to have. And maybe I'm not articulate on my questioning, but help me bridge those gaps.
Yes, sir. Every budget, of course, is built on the preceding year. And so while we might, as we manage material readiness risk across our fleet, making sure that the ships that we deploy and the aircrafts that we push forward are prepared to do the mission in terms of their material condition. We have a backlog of some maintenance that is accumulated for a variety of reasons over the last 3 years. One of them has been, as I mentioned earlier, time. As we've operated at surge tempo, both training time and maintenance time has been constrained. That has caused us to reduce the scope of maintenance done on ships, sometimes to forego doing the maintenance altogether, and there has been a shortfall in the funding of the maintenance as well. But that's a manageable risk as we work just in time to get the capacity we need for deployments and for our surge obligations in case of unforeseen circumstances or crises. When you then walk into the continuing resolution, it takes that risk that we're managing temporally year to year, and it adjusts the calculus. As I mentioned, we did not anticipate 29 of 85 availabilities not being completed. So that's an exacerbation of the problem of 29 ships that didn't get maintenance that we expected that would. And then that, of course, for the budget under consideration today, FY12, the $367 million shortfall in availabilities, again, is managing risk across a whole number of considerations, but the additional 29 plus the availabilities in terms of scope and number that we were planning on carrying in 12 is now disproportionately risky. Doesn't mean it's become intolerable, but it's carrying more risk than we anticipated, and of course we'd like to mitigate that by some budget solution for 11 and then get on with 12.
If you have the opportunity to do it, I don't expect you to do it today, but at some point in time, could you supply our committee with a list of what maintenance that $560 million would incorporate? In other words, what are we doing? Because everybody's tolerable risk may be somebody else's intolerable risk, and we would just like to be able to look at that to get a snapshot of what risk we are taking by not doing that maintenance. Is that something you could do at some particular point in time for us, for the record?
Sure. I'd be pleased to.
Good. Thank you, Admiral. Now I'd like to recognize the distinguished ranking member for a final question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And of course, coming from Guam and with the military buildup, my questions will be centered to General Tran. General, can you address concerns about training capabilities in the Asia-Pacific region? The QDR stated, and I quote, "Finally, the United States seeks to develop additional opportunities for joint and combined training in the Western Pacific that respond to the need for constant readiness of U.S. forces to carry out joint operations," unquote. So that's a written statement there. Now, one of my concerns, General, I've long expressed, and of course Guam is looking forward to the 8,600 Marines from Okinawa. We're welcoming the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Forces, and as you probably know, these are the same forces that liberated Guam 65 years ago, so our people look at it as a homecoming. But I've long expressed my concern about the preferred alternative location for the firing ranges on Guam. Although the programmatic agreement has been signed by our governor a couple of days ago, there are still concerns about this property. And I, along with Senator Webb, have urged that DOD look more closely at Tinian for the firing ranges, and that's our neighboring island in the Northern Marianas. The Marine requirements seem to have shifted since the beginning of the EIS process in 2006. So I remain skeptical that the land on Guam needed for the range can be leased by the Department of Defense. Now, what I wanted to get from you today in a statement for the record is, what is it? We have never really received any specific information about why is it more advantageous for training on Guam versus Tinian. And I would think that more virtual, urban-style training could be done on Guam and live fire in Tinian. Could you comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the question. Obviously, we're still early in implementation of the AIP process. The Commandant's intent in the Pacific is really threefold. First, to ensure that the Marines are properly positioned in the Pacific writ large to respond to whatever threat and to support our national security objectives. And that wherever Marines are, that they have the ability to properly train in order to be prepared for those contingencies. And last but certainly not least, that wherever Marines are, that their quality of life meets standards and promotes a high state of morale and readiness. Guam is clearly strategically located in the Pacific region and offers unique advantages to forward deployed forces that provides us with a flexible response. We are indeed working with the government of Guam right now with respect to ranges and our ability to train. We have recently entertained, I think, as you know, the governor of Guam, and had the opportunity to take him down to Quantico to show him some of our operational ranges and provide him with a perspective as to how we operate our ranges, the safety measures and margins that are associated with range operation, and how we cohabit side by side with the civilian communities that adjoin our various bases. The Department of the Navy is our lead in conducting the dialogue with Guam. The guiding principles that the Undersecretary is using in his dialogue is that, first and foremost, one Guam, as you know, that we will coordinate projects that meet both the Marine Corps' needs as well as the needs of the government of Guam in terms of infrastructure and the like. Green Guam, that will protect the natural resources and promote energy efficiency. 24/7 access to Paget and to Paget Cave, the cultural sites that are on the eastern side of the island, and that will also minimize the footprint that the Marine Corps has on the island with the goal of a net negative land acquisition strategy. At this point in time, we're still stepping through the pros and cons of what kind of a range can be constructed adjacent to Route 15 on Guam. The downside of having a range off the island is a couple of things. First, Marines would not have immediate access to a range or training area, which again goes back to the question of time and risk in the event that we have to deploy quickly. Field firing weapons and preparing for a rapid move would require close and ready access to ranges. Transportation to off-island training creates a time requirement. It generates additional operational and maintenance expense. And at this point in time, we haven't conducted enough of an assessment on any of the potential off-island training sites to understand whether they could even meet our training requirements or not. So it's very much a work in progress, ma'am, and I don't want to not answer your question, but I also don't want to make a statement that would be conjecture.
So in other words, no definite decisions have been made, and as you said, it's a work in progress.
It is indeed a work in progress, ma'am.
Thank you, General. Thank you.
Admiral Generals, we want to thank you for your service to our country. Thank you so much for what you do to train and protect our men and women in uniform. We really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. I think I speak for the ranking member. Our door is open to you at any time. If there's something you see that we need to be doing to help the readiness of our country, you have an open invitation, and we just appreciate your help in helping us do the job we need to do. Thank you, and this hearing's adjourned.